Welcome to everybody. And Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We will talk about some fundamental issues here, which have been the concern of all of the leaders of the Ummah. And basically the issue is, what is the diagnosis for the problems of the Ummah and how can it be solved? And what I would like to suggest is that many people have grasped some aspect of the problem, but Allah Ta'ala has blessed me with some clarity. The main issue is subtle and difficult to understand, but once we understand it, we can actually solve it. The solution lies in a direction which is not where people have been putting the maximum amount of energy. Of course, there are multiple problems. As the Prophet ﷺ said, that there are 72 branches of Iman, and I think that there are 72 dimensions of the problem to solve. But there are some root causes, and some priorities where we need to start first, and we need to. So I think that the issues that I'm about to discuss are very central. Although there are other issues as well, which are perhaps equally important, if not more. But that's something we can judge later. So basically, what I would like to say, the main thesis is that today, the religion of the world is economic theory. And this is not recognized. And because we fail to recognize it, this religion has made inroads into the hearts and minds of the Muslims. And this religion is so toxic that it doesn't allow us to actually understand the primary teachings of Islam and to act upon them. And because it is a concealed religion, because it doesn't say it's a religion, it says it's a science. So people naively and unsuspectingly learn the teachings of economic theory in the belief that this is just a kind of knowledge like other kinds of knowledge. So even the Islamization of knowledge problem idea gets this thing wrong in the sense that it says, okay, this is a Western knowledge and we need to, it has lots of elements of shirk and kufr mixed in, so let's extract the good things from it and leave the bad things. But if the whole thing is actually a religion, then we simply cannot interact with it in any way. And so that's the main idea, which will not be apparent when we go into the technical details, but this is the root idea which is behind what I am about to talk about. So to begin with, we want to establish that actually economics pretends to be a science, but it is a branch of moral philosophy. It started out as moral philosophy, and it remains a branch of moral philosophy. And moral philosophy is just another name for a religion for people who don't believe in God. Because if you don't believe in God, then all you can have is moral philosophy. So what a deep insight of Karl Marx is that, capitalism, today we see it exploiting millions and billions of people all over the world. How can it do that? How can a few powerful people influence and affect and control the lives of billions, much more massive than in terms of group size than the small number of people. Today, a handful of people have more than half the wealth of the planet. So why doesn't a group of multi-billion people seize the property of these billionaires? The reason is that their minds are conditioned to not revolt, to accept the system. And this is really very important to understand. Similarly, why were we colonized? Because we accepted to be colonized. And why is it true that even today, the poorest countries of the world, the ones that were ex-colonies, are sending billions of dollars every year to the richest country in the form of interest payments and others? Why do we accept this kind of continued colonization? It's again because we have been conditioned to believe that this is the good and the right and the best economic system, and this is all we can do, and there's no options available to us. So it's a form of mind control. And so it's important to understand how this mind control is done so that we can free ourselves from it. And one of the important aspects of mind control is that it is concealed. When we know that, when we don't know that we are functioning with mind control, then it's easier for others to control us. When we are aware that there is somebody who's pulling the strings, then it becomes easier for us to liberate ourselves. There's a very interesting article called Getting to Philosophy in Wikipedia, which says that if you take any article in Wikipedia and click on the first link, and you get to the second article, and then you click on the first link, eventually you will get to. So what does this mean? It means that the philosophy forms the foundation of all knowledge, but we are not aware of it. We think philosophy is something that's irrelevant and marginal and doesn't matter in our lives, but actually it's the foundation of all knowledge. It's the foundation of all of our knowledge, but it is never discussed because it's concealed and buried underground, and the whole building is constructed on top of it. We are not aware of these foundations. That's why the first step to self-liberation, to understanding why we think in the ways we think, is to become aware of the foundations of our thought, which have been built by Western intellectuals. So now, we have to, in order to understand the foundations of our own thought, we have to go through the history of the West and learn how they learned to think in the way that they think. And this is a very deep and complex and long subject, which I will summarize in very, very crude and very brief and sketchy ways. So basically, we have discussed how Europe fell into the Dark Ages when Constantine banned all knowledge other than Christianity. And so basically, that was the start of the Dark Ages. And basically, when the reconquest of Spain, Al-Andalus, started somewhere in the 13th century, then the Europeans started to translate all of the books in the libraries. And there were millions of books in the libraries of the Muslims in Spain, because Islam is a unique religion in that it strongly encourages knowledge. The ink of the scholar's pen is precious compared to the blood of the martyrs. And there are so many other encouragements. So Islam is unique in encouraging knowledge and acquisition of knowledge, and acquisition of knowledge from all sources, not just from what is traditionally thought of as religious knowledge. So this flood of new knowledge created the Renaissance of Europe and eventually led to the Enlightenment, but it also created massive problems because the knowledge that came in was in conflict with Christianity and with Catholicism, and that eventually led to the breakup of the church and massive religious warfare, which lasted for a century or more, and that led to so much death and destruction and violence that Europeans got sick of religion, and they confined it to a corner, and they created secular basis for knowledge. It was sort of a necessity for them. They had to create secular politics and economics because the religious basis led to massive warfare. So they had to create economic theory without religion because they were forced to do so. And so basically, Western intellectuals search for knowledge which would be created without a religious basis. This is very important, and this is the root of the development of the secular intellectual tradition. So one of the important discoveries of Imam Al-Ghazali is that you cannot get to certainty from observations and logic. And this is very clearly stated in Al-Muqaddimin al-Dalala, deliverance from error as it's translated. You could also say deliverance from doubt, which is more euphonic. But anyway, what he said, and it's a very brief argument, that you start, if, can I trust my senses? He says that, look, if I look at a star, it looks like a small dot of light far away. But when we analyze it with our reason and logic, we learn that it is a huge body of burning matter which is transmitting light. So our eyes obviously deceive us. So we cannot trust our senses to reveal the truth about the world. And what about logic? Well, he also gives many examples of how reason can lead us astray in many different ways. And anybody who has tried to use reasoning and based on personal experience, you know that you have often logicked out a conclusion and found that this conclusion was wrong. So logic is not 100% trustworthy. So if observations don't lead to certainty and logic doesn't lead to certainty, then how can we get to certainty? And basically, Imam Al-Ghazali said that this certainty came to my heart when it was illuminated by the nur of Allah. So the only basis for certainty is religion, and the only basis for certainty is our heart. And one very crucial insight of Imam Al-Ghazali is that certainty is a condition of the heart. It is not a condition of the brain. The brain can never achieve certainty. It's when we feel certain of something that we achieve certainty. Now, the main problem for Western intellectuals was that they lost access to this basis. They used to believe in Christianity and with all their hearts and minds, and they used to believe that the Bible is the word of God and it is sacred and there's no errors. But when conflicts and disputations and debates arose on this fundamental issue, and they said that, okay, we cannot trust the Bible, then what can we trust? So this was the fundamental, I mean, this was a hot battle in the early development of current Western intellectual tradition. And so basically, this is a problem that the Western intellectual tradition is still stuck on. They haven't resolved it because there is no way for them to resolve it. Because basically two schools of thought arose. One was the empiricist school, which was mainly in England, which said that we can trust our senses and this is the only source of certainty. Another was the rationalist school in Europe, and they said that we can trust our logic and reason, and that leads to certainty. And both of these had already been rejected by Imam Al-Ghazali. So instead of certainty, what they did was they created an illusion of certainty. And this is all of their knowledge about even physics and even, and of course, especially the social sciences, this is built not on certainty, but on a pretense of certainty. They pretend that what we are saying is certain and logical and derived from observations and logic, when it is not derived from observations and logic. It's derived from certain axioms which they take as certain without examination. And these axioms are false. Just like Christianity, the theology is built on the axiom that 1 is equal to 3, and this is not subject to doubt or discussion or examination. And then you can do all sorts of logic to arrive at all sorts of conclusion. But the fundamental error at the bottom of all this is never exposed or revealed or discussed. So I discussed already how the Western intellectual tradition developed in two branches. One of is empiricist and the other is rationalist. And a grand synthesis was made in early 20th century by logical positivism, which says that knowledge comes from both senses and from logic. But and they pretended that both of these sources are certain, when in fact, as Imam Al-Ghazali had already showed earlier, both of these sources are subject to doubt and error. And so even now, the philosophers of the West have three methods, of which the third they use rarely. three methods to arrive at conclusions about the world, arrive at knowledge, basically. How do we get to knowledge? The most frequently used method is called the deductive method. So we start with some certain axioms. They don't discuss where we get these certain axioms, but once we have these axioms, then we can use logic to build upon them. But the main issue is hidden under the carpet, because the issue is that we cannot get anything, we cannot get any statement about which we can be certain from logic or from senses alone. And therefore, we cannot start the process of deduction on sound foundations. That's where Descartes comes in, and he said that I think, therefore I am. And he said that this is a certainty you can arrive at from pure logic. But this argument is false and fallacious for many reasons. There's just nothing you can get to from zero. If you start with zero knowledge, you cannot get to any amount of knowledge, not from senses and not from logic. The second method is called induction, and basically all of science is based on induction. But induction doesn't lead to certainty. Induction is basically you observe some pattern in the observation. You see that the sun is coming up every day, and you say, okay, sun is going to come up tomorrow. But there is no certainty in this. The chicken sees that the people who are having it are feed it every day, but one day they pick it up and they sacrifice it. Similarly for the goat. So the repeated experience of similar observations doesn't guarantee any outcome, any continuity in that. One day the sun could go supernova, and then the sun will not come up in the morning. The third method is called abduction, and this is rarely used, but basically the point is that you see something and you guess at an explanation. But the point is that none of these methods lead to certainty. So there are no ways to get to certain knowledge. And this is contrary to the fundamental assumption. One of the axioms of Western intellectual tradition is that knowledge is only things which you are certain of. So as opposed to this, Allah Ta'ala tells us in the Quran that we are only making guesses. And this is the truth. All of our knowledge is only based on guesswork, except for that which was revealed to us, which is certain because it is the word of God. So this is a fundamental epistemological difference in our theories of knowledge. So why did the Western intellectuals not recognize that our knowledge is doubtful? There's no harm in that. I mean, we can say that everything we know is subject to doubt and error, but and once you acknowledge that, then you have the possibility of building up a sound body of knowledge. You can say that, okay, everything we say is tentative, subject to error and maybe correction. Why do you want to say that everything we know is certain? And if it is not certain, then we don't count it as knowledge. Well, basically, I have analyzed it as a trauma of loss of faith. Once they lost their belief in Christianity, they said, okay, everybody believed that this thing was completely 100% certain, not subject to doubt, but it deceived us. Christianity, the religion, deceived us and threw us into error and doubt and superstition and caused violent fighting and warfare. And so we can't trust this anymore. And so we cannot build on unsound foundation. So next time, now that we have had a bad experience, let's rebuild our knowledge on sound and certain basis. So this and the necessity I already discussed earlier of the religious warfare led them to say that, okay, we have to have knowledge which is not religious, and also we have to have this knowledge should command consensus among all the warring factions so that we all agree on this. And to get agreement, they couldn't say that, well, this is something I think and it's subjective and it's subject to error, but this is how I think we should do, because other people will say, no, I don't think you're right and I think you're wrong, and my own feeling is the other idea. So they had to say that, no, what I'm saying is 100% true and valid and everybody should accept it. So this problem, this dilemma, which had no solution actually, because there was no way to get to certain, this was resolved by saying that, okay, our secular modernity produces certain knowledge. And they assumed this and they believed this and they taught it to others. And that's why we are also in deceived about this, because they teach social sciences to us, economics to us, as if it is a science, as if it is certain knowledge. And our Muslim economists also believe this, that, okay, what they are saying, telling us is knowledge, so we must believe it. It's just like the law of gravity, and to reject it is wrong. But the truth is that the claim that is being made to objectivity, rationality, value neutrality is not correct. All human knowledge must be built on moral foundations. There is no option. And because the West rejected the moral foundations of Christianity, they had to build it on top of different moral foundations. But these moral foundations were concealed because you cannot give any proof of any moral principle. And so you cannot be certain, because there is a famous saying from David Hume that you cannot derive aught from, you cannot derive social norms. You can't derive that thou shalt not kill from either logic or from observations. This is something that's fairly obvious. You cannot derive moral rulings from what you observe, and you cannot derive moral rulings from what you see. So the only source for moral knowledge is guidance from Allah Ta'ala. So they were caught, the Western intellectual tradition, in a dilemma. They needed to have moral foundations, but there were no moral foundations available without their religion. And so they built their knowledge on some contradictions. So the goal of this talk is to expose the moral foundations of modern economic theory. Modern economic theory claims to be value-free. It claims to be a positive science. It claims to describe how the systems work, the economic system works, but actually all of these claims are false. Economic theory is deeply value-laden. As I said, it is a religion. It's a branch of moral philosophy. It fails as a description of reality. And so this became obvious to everyone in the wake of the global financial crisis, where all economists failed to predict the most important economic event that occurred in this millennium. And this has happened repeatedly. Economists have failed to predict some simple economic events almost continuously, because their theories, more than failure to predict, their theories actually say the opposite. They say that these things cannot happen. And some of the leading Nobel Prize winning economists said confidently that no, there is no financial crisis. And people who were saying that, people who were pragmatists, real world practitioners said that, look, there's something wrong going on. And the economists said, pooh, nothing like that. Our economic theory tells us that there's nothing wrong. And so not just failing to predict, but actually suppressing knowledge of reality. So economic theory is not descriptive. It is actually it is actually a religion. That's the best way to understand it. So one of the key things to understand is that the Enlightenment of Europe abandoned Christianity and adopted rationality as a religion. And now there is a very, very problematic issue that Muslims do not understand the meaning of Enlightenment rationality. Very recently, there was an economics textbook that was published by an Islamic economics in Malaysia. And they debated that economic theory tells us that human beings are rational. And they said, yes, Islam also teaches us rationality. That Islam tells us to trust in our reason and to use our reason to think about things and so on and so forth. But what they fail to understand is that the way we understand reason is very different from the way that Western intellectuals understand reason. So to the West, reason means believing in the senses and in logical consequences of the empirical evidence. This is the standard. I mean, the only basis for knowledge is observations and logic. And reason means to trust only in observations and knowledge and not in the wahi. So in particular, reason tells us that there is no God because we have no observational evidence for it. Reason tells us that there is no afterlife because how can we observe afterlife? How can we logic our way to understanding that there is an afterlife? So when our Islamic economists say that we accept the axiom of rationality in economics, then they are also accepting the rejection of God and the rejection of afterlife and the rejection of judgment and basically abandoning Islam because all of this is irrational. So when economists say that all human beings behave rationally, this is actually an axiom which says that all human beings maximize pleasure on this earth because it would be irrational to sacrifice pleasure on this earth for the pleasure of the akhirah. Who has seen the akhirah after all? Where is the evidence for this? So economics is primarily concerned with justice. It is concerned with justifying the capitalist economic system that we see in the world around us. But they never mention morality. And so this is why I'm saying this is concealed role and function. What economics actually does is very different from what it pretends to do, what it claims to do. It is taught as a science. It is taught as a observational and logical fact about worlds around us. This is the policy we should do. We should pursue the maximization of GNP per capita. We should increase our exports. We should cut our government budget deficit, etc. All of these are concealed moral arguments. We do not understand this, and that because of this, we are stuck in implementing very, very harmful, poisonous economic policies all over the economic worlds because we don't understand that the economic theory that we are enforcing is actually teaching us to do things which are helpful to the wealthy and harmful to the poor. And this is because it is a moral framework. It tells us what to do, what we ought to do in situations where we face choices. And so there is a very, very puzzling thing that how can economic theory get away with being a moral philosophy? Won't people compare it with what happens in the real world and find out that it is wrong? So you see, we see this happening all the time. We see that economists fail to predict the global financial crisis. And so we could say that, okay, let's reject economic theory and rebuild it on new foundations, but this was not done. Why? Because it's tied with the desire of the powerful. Economic theory protects the interests of the wealthy, and therefore, even though it keeps being rejected and refuted by the empirical evidence, people keep on believing it and supporting it and protecting it from the contradictions that arise with empirical theory. And this is something which has been noted by many, many, many people, economists, including Keynes, who said that professional economists don't care about any conflict between what the theory says and what the real world shows us. So there is a very nice book called Economic Analysis, Moral Philosophy and Public Policy by Hausman and McPherson. And they recognize that basically morality is involved everywhere throughout the economic theory. It's a mixture. It's not some things come from observing the world, but some things come from moral philosophy. But the moral philosophy is concealed. So when we want to talk about Islamic economics, the first place to start is to uncover the moral foundations of economic theory. Without doing that, without doing that, we are not in a position to create an Islamic alternative. Once we recognize the moral foundations of economic theory, then we can get to create an Islamic economics by saying that, okay, these moral foundations that are being used by Western economics are wrong, and we have to replace these foundations by Islamic foundations. And to be very, very brief, the economic theory tells us that we should build economics on greed, competition, and individuality and hedonism. These are the moral foundations, and these are exactly opposed to Islamic moral foundations of generosity, cooperation, social responsibility, looking for brotherhood, for unity of the ummah, taking care of others before you think of yourself. So these are exactly the opposite of moral foundations. So economic theory builds on moral foundations which are diametrically opposite of Islamic moral foundations. So let me talk a little bit about what happened in Islamic economics. So one of the puzzles that comes up from what I'm saying is that how come Islamic economists fail to recognize this conflict, this dramatic contradiction between what economists are saying and what Islamic economics ought to be. And basically, this actually is a matter of historical record. The first generation of Islamic economists recognized the conflict between economics and Islam very clearly. And economists in the secular economists, Western economists in the 20th century said that the foundation of economics is scarcity. There is not enough goods, so we must work on increasing goods. This is a 20th century development. And Islamic economists said that, no, this is false, because the bounty of Allah Ta'ala is vast and it is mentioned all over the Quran. And so this is exactly the opposite of scarcity. Allah Ta'ala is bountiful. He has given us plenty of stuff. So we don't have scarcity. But for various reasons, which I have discussed in some papers, the second generation of Islamic economists accepted scarcity and rejected the ideas of the first generation. And they said the scarcity is self-evident. We don't have enough food, we don't have enough, lots of people don't have enough things. So obviously we must accept scarcity. And then they are faced with the problem of rationalizing how to rationalize this idea of scarcity with the Fazlullah and the ayats about the bounty of the Quran. So they made up some very, very technical ideas like which have no real basis in either Islamic or in Western intellectual tradition. They said we have something called relative scarcity, but we don't have absolute scarcity. But these are just terminology which has been made up to reconcile the conflict between the Quran and modern economics. And so the key problem here is not economic theory as such, but it is shock and awe of Western intellectual accomplishments. Islamic economists have been so awed by the West that they say that, okay, if they're saying it, it must be true. And so we must adjust our understanding of the Quran and the Hadith in order to combine it with Western knowledge. And this is really the central problem. So now we come to a very important question to understand Western thought. We go back to Western thought. How did Western economists make scarcity the foundation of economics? So it turns out that before the early 20th century, economists was run on different thought foundations. And basically, there's a paper by Kutter and Rappaport, which says that economists was based on what we can call the material welfare school. And material welfare school, which corresponds roughly to Islamic ideas, not directly, but much more than scarcity. And it says that basically we should look at how material comforts, how food and housing and clothing and other things, music and luxuries, how they create welfare and comfort in human beings. This is the key goal of economic theory. So this is very different from the idea of scarcity, whereas the material welfare is a sensible approach to economics. Scarcity is a nonsensical approach. And why this transition from sense to nonsense? This is a very important story, which we will discuss in very brief outline. So one of the, as I said earlier, the philosophical foundations of knowledge are of extreme importance, but they are buried and concealed, and we don't even think of them as important. So one of the major philosophical battles, I think the most important philosophical battle of the 20th century, was the story of logical positivism. It shaped thought of Western intellectuals and continues to be extremely influential in how we think about the world today, even though we are not aware of this. Basically, I've discussed this in detail, and I'm going to sketch it in very brief outline here. It starts with the rejection of God, which we have discussed. This came about because of basically rejection of Christianity and the Western conceit, the pride and arrogance that if Christianity is the best religion, and if this is wrong, then all other religions are wrong, and we don't even need to examine them, because automatically it's an axiom that the Christianity is the best religion. So once we reject Christianity, we can reject without examination, without thought, all other religions. They are inferior to Christianity, just like every Eastern thought is inferior to Western thought. So they rejected God, they rejected Christianity, they rejected all religions. And then this led to rejection of all unobservables. They said, why? The problem is that we were believing in things for which there was no empirical evidence. So now we will not believe anything for which there is no evidence. And then there was basically a process which we can call deification of science. They said, okay, we can't trust in the Bible, so what can we trust? And they say, okay, what we'll do is we'll trust in science as our new religion. Science is going to solve all the problems of the world. And the way to tell between science and religion is that science is based only on observables, what we can see in the world around us. And so they came up with this idea, which is still very strong among Western intellectuals, that science is the only path to knowledge. And actually, now people have come to recognize that this is also a religion, and there is a name for this. This is called scientism, the belief that science can solve all human problems. And this is obviously false when you think about it. If two people are, if a man and a wife, his wife get divorced and they suffer from pain, science has no solutions for this. This requires learning about character and conduct and morals. And these things science has nothing to say about. But unfortunately, because Western intellectuals start to believe that science is the only source of knowledge, they turn this whole subject of humanities, how we study human beings, how we study society, into the social science. And this is a transformation which took place in the early 20th century. And this is something which very few people understand, because when we talk about economics, we say, okay, it started with Adam Smith. But actually, Adam Smith was studying a moral philosophy. He was not studying economic theory. Modern economic theory was born in the 20th century with Lionel Robbins and his scarcity definition, which removed or actually concealed the moral foundations and tried to convert economics into a science according to the logical positivist understanding of science. So one of the key consequences of this is something which very few people recognize. And basically, if you say that all knowledge comes from science, then you reject our internal personal experiences. If I feel angry, if I feel sad, if I feel happy, these experiences, although they are knowledge to me, I know my internal experiences, they are not scientific. There is no way for other people to know about it. It's not based, my feelings are not observable to others. And because they are not observable, we cannot do science with them. So in fact, a whole field of psychology called behavioral psychology emerged as a consequence of logical positivism. And B.F. Skinner, he wrote this famous book called Beyond Freedom and Dignity. And the school of behavioral psychology was dominant in the West for many decades and continues to be influential. And this is the most absurd and ridiculous theory of psychology you can imagine, because it says that human beings don't have feelings, or rather that feelings don't matter. The internal experience of human beings don't matter. Human beings have just behaviors. all we can study is the observable behavior. So, for example, to give a very simple example, the earlier psychologists, if somebody was afraid of being in a closed space, people would analyze that maybe he had some bad experiences. He was shut in the bathroom by his mother, and that's why he has this fear. But Skinner said that no, forget about history and past and fear experience. Just concentrate on behavior. What is the problem? The problem is that the man feels afraid when he is in a small space. Okay, so what we do is we turn this unpleasant experience into a pleasant experience. We put him in a closed space and we give him some chocolate to eat, and he will feel happy, and that will solve the problem. So this is a very superficial approach, and basically it says that human beings are robots. You can program their behavior by stimulus and response, and there is no morality, and there is no. And so that's why the title of his book is called Beyond Freedom and Dignity. This is the most absurd and stupid theory about human beings that you can imagine, but this was the dominant school of psychology for many decades and continues to be influential. So one of the consequences of logical positivism is that there is no basis to derive moral judgments. And basically, moral judgments, ethics, morality, this is not part of human knowledge. It just removes this whole business from human knowledge, because we can't arrive, science cannot teach us what morality is, so morality does not exist. So one of the important consequences of this is detailed by Julie Rubin in her book called The Making of the Modern University. And basically she says that for a long time, Western intellectuals believed that knowledge about morality was just like knowledge about physics. They are both aspects of the same type of knowledge. But basically in the 20th century, positivism said that morality is not knowledge, values are not knowledge, and only observable scientific knowledge is knowledge. So what happened as a result was a massive transformation in university education. In the early 20th century, if you look at the university catalogs, Harvard or any other university, and you will find that the catalogs say that our goal is to do tarbiyah, to build the character of the student, to create leadership, to create social responsibility, civic responsibility, understand rights and laws, and basically shape the character of the student and make them good people. We used to have a subject called civics when we were young. And so what is civics? Civics is teach you civil responsibility. But now this subject is no longer on the curriculum. Why? Because positivism said that these things are not part of human knowledge. And so basically all human knowledge was taken out. And if you look at a modern curriculum, it makes no mention of training of students, of personality of students, of character building, even though these are the most important aspects of life. And basically another book or essay actually traces the consequences of this rejection of morality on economic theory. And she says that, Julie Nelson now, that we have naturally good morals. We are inclined to be generous, cooperative, and have compassion and sympathy for others and try to work with them. But economics teaches us that these are wrong, and it teaches us toxic values, that you should be selfish, you should be greedy, you should be individualistic, you should be competitive, and you should search for pleasure. And all of these things are wrong values, which economic theory teaches us without our being aware of this. So how did basically scarcity come into being? That's the issue that I am talking about. And basically the human welfare theory said was based on an internal feeling of satisfaction. How do we feel when we are hungry and we eat bread? Well, it makes me happy. But this is feeling, as I said, positivists don't accept feelings as part of science. So what can we do? They say, okay, forget about the feeling. There was a standard positivist tactic. What does this feeling do in terms of behavior? So if I like to do something, then I do it. So they say, okay, let's look at the actions. Let's look at the choices made. So they say that, okay, we will say that if a person does something, he chooses something, that is what makes him happy. And as far as depth of happiness, this is something that's irrelevant. Yani, I would say, and that was what economists say, that if child is hungry and he eats bread, this satisfies his basic needs, and it brings him a lot more pleasure than somebody would get if he was rich and he was listening to music. Yes, listening to music brings you pleasure, but it is not the same level of pleasure that a hungry man gets when he eats bread. But economic theory said this comparison of feelings is not valid. Pleasure is pleasure, and pleasure is unmeasurable. And basically, the only thing we can do is choice. So if a hungry man reaches out for bread, or if a rich man flips the switch on the radio to listen to music, both of these are choices, and they are the same choice. There's no difference between giving a Rolls Royce to a billionaire who wants to fulfill that desire and giving bread to hungry children. These two are the same type of things because there's no welfare. So this led to revealed preference theory by Samuelson, that preferences are in the heart and they are revealed by choices. But the choices don't capture an essential distinction which was lost. There is needs which are, if I fulfill this need, if I'm hungry and I get bread, this will actually prolong my health and it will satisfy my basic needs, and it's very important for me. If there's something that I desire, that I want to listen to music, and if I don't get it, it will not cause me any harm. In fact, the Arabic word zarurat captures this difference, because zarurat comes from zarar, and it means that if this desire of mine is not fulfilled, it will cause me harm. But a want is something that I want something, but if I don't get it, it will not cause me harm. But this distinction was made meaningless by positivism. So the modern definition of economics is that the goal of the economist is to satisfy all the wants of the consumers, whether they are genuine or artificial. And economics says that we cannot differentiate between wants and needs. And this is dramatically different from Islamic concepts. But our Islamic economists, because they are impressed by the West, have not understood this, have not realized this, and even trying to mix up the distinction, even though it's fundamental. And if you just start an economic theory on the basis of this distinction, it will be very, very different from modern economic theory. So there was a very important and central basis why for creating an Islamic economics which was very radically different from modern Western economics. So why did we fail to do this for 30, 40 years? When Islam provides us a very clear distinction. This is a question to ponder. Basically, so how can we resolve? I already discussed that there was this discussion between Fazlullah, the bounty of Allah, and the apparent scarcity, which says that we don't have enough. So once you differentiate between needs and wants, you can solve this problem easily. If you look at the needs of human beings, there is plenty of material resources available to satisfy all of these needs. People have calculated it will take about $700 billion per year to satisfy the basic needs of the entire planet. This means food, education, health, housing, clothing, everything. There is 2 trillion of defense expenditure in the world today. About 400 billion is spent on cosmetics, and 200 billion is spent on obesity problems. So overeating, if you look at just hunger, only about the money being spent on overeating and its problems would be enough to feed the planet. So what Islam teaches us, that poverty is caused by injustice, by the refusal of the rich to recognize the rights of the poor. Poverty is not caused by lack of resources. We already have more than enough. So the idea that we have scarcity and the reason that people are hungry is because there's not enough food, this is wrong. There's plenty of food on the planet. The food resources per person have been growing over the past century. And there's much more than enough to feed all the planet. So if we say that, okay, we want to grow more food, that's not going to solve the problem. What that's going to do is to increase the money in the hands of the wealthy. So scarcity is actually a red herring created by economics to distract attention from the main source of the problem. What is the main source of the problem? The main source of the problem is that zulm of the wealthy and the failure to take social responsibility for the poor. So Islam teaches us very clearly that that we should fulfill our needs. It says you wear your beautiful clothes and eat and drink. So fulfill your needs. Don't worry about. And you're not rahibs. You're not monks. You don't have to starve yourself. You don't have to wear torn clothing in order to avoid social. Basically, you don't have to. But basically, it says don't pursue luxury. Don't go to israf. Don't go to tabzir. And Allah Ta'ala condemns those who follow their desires and take their desires as God. And this is exactly what the religion of economics that I'm talking about is, the religion of worship of desire. And this religion has taken over the world and is widely believed among Muslims today. Muslims believe in fulfilling all their needs and desires and to pursue luxury and to pursue higher standards of life. Islamic economists are talking about how we can increase standards of life in the Islamic world. But in fact, the Islamic economist's job was not to fulfill all wants and needs. It was to say that we must make sure that we fulfill all the needs. If there is a million students who are uneducated, a million children who are hungry, then we can't build luxuries. Then the rich people in the society are not allowed to pursue their luxuries, because the first responsibility of the society is to feed the hungry. So this is not part of modern economic theory. This should have been the basis for an Islamic economics, but it never happened because Muslim economists were too impressed by Western theories. So I have a paper called Normative Foundations of Scarcity. I've said that scarcity seems like an objective idea. People don't have enough. If we produce more goods, then they will get more, and that will solve the economic problems of man. But this is not true. So first fundamental problem is that we make needs and wants the same. This is not true. The needs have priority. And if we simply take just one rule, that before you start fulfilling the wants of any member, you should make sure that the needs of every member of society are fulfilled. This just one simple rule would radically transform the economic system, economic theory, everything in the world. And this should be the basis of an Islamic economics, but even the Islamic economists have not mentioned this in their textbooks. There are 2 textbooks on Islamic economics which have come out in the past year, and nobody talks about this fundamental issue. So one of the other tricks that are used, the concealment and the deception of economics, is that they say that we will not study how desires are formed. We will just, if somebody says, I want something, we won't explore why is he saying he wants something. So this is again a problem, because this is actually meant to justify the economic system. And how does it justify the economic system? Well, basically the key characteristic of capitalism is that it creates massive amounts of surplus. The capitalism built around producing far, far, far beyond the needs of the people. So if you're going to produce a huge amount, then you need to make people want these things. If people don't want things, then you will produce things and they will just stay in the warehouses. Nobody will buy them. So that's why it's essential for capitalism to create wants. And this is done by advertising. Advertising makes people want things that they don't really need. and it makes people go out and buy things which they never use and which are not useful to them, because capitalism cannot work without this. So this is one more thing, that what's called consumer sovereignty is an economic theory, which is actually a normative theory. It says, don't look behind the curtain. Don't look at how the system is creating desires in order to be able to function. And also another trick that is used is that they say that we should study economic theory in isolation. We shouldn't connect it with the politics. Who has power, who has money, and what they want to do. These are things which have to do with politics and society. In economics, we just study the economic system at works. We don't worry about who's wealthy, who's powerful, and so on. So these are blindfolds which are created by modern economic theory to prevent us from understanding what's really going on in the world. And all over the Islamic world, economists are studying this Western economics, and their minds are being shaped to believe in these toxic falsehoods and to not be able to recognize the truth. And this is happening all over the world today. Economic theory is teaching us the wrong goals of life. When you start your economic study, it says that all rational people maximize utility, and they should maximize utility. And what is utility? Is the pleasure they get from consumption of goods and services. This is an absurd and ridiculous philosophy, because this is not the path to happiness. Even if you forget about the akhirah and you forget about the day of judgment, and if you're just concerned with happiness in the world, happiness does not come from eating and drinking. Happiness comes from character and from social responsibility. Basically, what we are economics uses is what I've called the Coca-Cola theory of happiness. If somebody drinks his heart and he drinks Coca-Cola and he feels happy, he gets an instantaneous burst of energy and cool. So he says, okay, I found the secret of life. Now, whenever I'm unhappy, I should drink Coca-Cola. That's the Coca-Cola theory of happiness. And it's completely absurd and ridiculous, but that is what economic theory is. We have to understand it's just as absurd as the idea that we can make all people of the world happy by just giving them enough Coca-Cola. And this has been studied seriously by Richard Easterlin. And the Easterlin paradox, he has shown that there has been massive increases in standards of living, but standards of happiness, welfare, feelings of satisfaction have not gone up. He has also studied cross countries that if actually money buys happiness, if you have more material and makes you more happy, then the poorer countries of the world should be, generally speaking, unhappy, and the richer countries of the world should be, generally speaking, happy. But this is not true. If you look at suicides, depression, alcoholism, many other factors, then you find that you can compare countries on happiness, and a country which has 10 times more money is not more happy than in terms of average level of life satisfaction of the citizens as a country which is 10 times as poor. So basically, money does not buy happiness. One of the important books Amartya's son wrote was called Poverty and Famine, and he analyzed 4 major famines. And again, it seems like, why do famines occur? Because there's not enough food. But when Amartya Sen analyzed it, he said this is not true. In all cases that he analyzed, there were big famines, millions of people died, but it was not because of lack of food. The Bengal famine, at the height of the famine, food was being shipped out of the area where there was a famine. Why? Because the people who were starving didn't have enough money to buy them. So he said it's not a failure of insufficient food, it's the failure of what he calls entitlements. The society feels that these people who don't have money, they don't deserve to have food. And when you feel that, then these people will not get to eat. If the social norm was, if Islam as teaches us that if somebody is hungry, then it's my job to feed him, then these famines would not have occurred. The food was there, but the money was not there, and the entitlement, the social norm. Capitalism teaches us that if you don't have money, then you don't deserve to buy the good. So if a student doesn't have money to buy an education, then he doesn't deserve an education. If a hungry person doesn't have money to buy bread, then he doesn't deserve bread. But this is a moral judgment of economics, but it is concealed. If it was openly said by economics, then we would reject it. We would say, no, I don't agree with this. But economic theory hides it behind beautiful mathematical frameworks. And so we don't understand that that's what we are being told, that we need to starve the poor people who don't have money. So the key moral question that Karl Marx raised is that are laborers being paid fair wages? And he said, no, he said labor theory of value. All value is created by labor, and any part which goes to the capitalist is exploitation. So this is a moral argument. Now, capitalist theory counters this, and it says that no, all earnings are rewards for productivity. Wages reflect productive income, productive contribution to society. So if somebody is poor, it's because he's not contributing to society. It's his own fault. If he produced something of value, then society would pay him. So basically, this is a fundamental mindset of capitalists, that if somebody is a billionaire, it's because he's producing billionaires worth value, productive value of worth billions to society. So this idea that everyone is justified, the wealth that people have is justified, this is very, very strongly part of capitalism. And this is a part of the moral foundations of capitalism, which are concealed. So economics builds us in the path of our recognizing the truth, many, many barriers. And the problem is that our economists all over the Islamic world are working with these blindfolds and barriers. So one of the barriers that it builds is that economists simply don't study income distribution, even though income distribution is the key. Why do some people have a lot of money? Why are some people poor? Well, one of the Nobel Prize winners says that we should not study income distributions. Why? Because, well, if you study growth, you will be doing more towards the welfare of mankind than if you study distribution. So this is just a way to block understanding. And in fact, economic theory says that we should study economic growth because that's the best way to relieve the hunger of the billions. But this is wrong. And if we said, okay, forget about growth, let's make hunger the first problem. Our basic problem is to make sure that there is no one hungry on the planet. Let's make this the goal of economics, the subject matter of economics. See, they say economic theory is the study of scarcity. Let's say that economic theory is the study of hunger, because Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَا يَحُضُّ عَلَىٰ طَعَامِ الْمِسْكِينَ, that this is the key, one of the key economic teachings of the Quran, that we have to worry about ta'am al-miskin. So let's make that the primary goal of economics. Make sure to wipe out hunger. This is not part of modern economic theory. Economists have no idea how to go about doing this. This is not even something which can be said within economic theory, because hunger is not a concept. Because we just talk about choices and desires, we don't talk about hunger within economic theory. It's not part of economics. So the barrier is understanding that people earn what they deserve. This is has a technical name which is called marginal productivity theory. And this is based on wrong mathematics, wrong axioms, and wrong application of theory to the real world. But all of our economists all over the world are being trained to believe in these false theories. But I have done this in the past. I explained the technical issues, why marginal product is wrong, why the economic theory fails, why the mathematics is wrong. But this is the wrong battle. This is not the area where we need to fight. The fight has to be on the moral foundation. Is it just? Is it fair? Because this is the place where economic theory is concealed. I mean, economic theory says that we are not making moral judgments, but actually, if you want to fight this battle, you have to say that you are making a moral judgment. You are saying that Bill Gates deserves all his money, and this is not true. We can show that he does not deserve this money that he is getting. He's using very unfair means, and you are saying that the people who are hungry are hungry because it's their fault, because they're not working to contribute to society. This is also wrong. They are very happy to contribute, but the system is such that it does not allow them to do so. So I have a paper which is called The Invisible Hand of Failures of the Invisible Hand. This is one of the central theories of economics that the first four statements are actually copied directly from a textbook of economics by Manikiv, which is very influential. And it basically, it says that everybody is motivated by selfishness. They call it self-interest because selfishness is a bad word. So they replace it by a word which is sort of value neutral. And this is what makes the society work well. If everybody is selfish, that makes economic system go well. And self-interest is better than love and kindness in promoting social welfare. Greed is good. And also that Adam Smith said all of these things. So these are four things which are mentioned openly in this text, and not so openly, but in all textbooks of economics. So this is the poisonous thoughts that are being taught to students all over the Islamic world by Muslim teachers. That is really the sadness and the irony and the tragedy of the Islamic world today. That we are teaching poison to our own children while we have faith in Islam, and our Islam is teaching us that these things are wrong, but we don't recognize this. In fact, cooperation, service, recognition, these are motivators of human behavior, and Islam teaches us about these things. And the market economies don't work very well. They cause enormous amount of damage to the poor, and they cause enormous amount of concentration of wealth in the hands of the rich. And how does economics conceal this? They say, let's look at GNP per capita. GNP per capita means not looking at the income distribution. It means just add up all the wealth. So as long as the wealth is there, even if it's only in the hands of the rich, it still counts as wealth for everybody, because per capita means you distribute it among all the population. So this is a way to deceive people into believing that things are getting better when things are actually getting worse. And again, these things, the self-interest does not promote self-fulfilled welfare. Love and kindness and compassion work much better at promoting social welfare. And also, Adam Smith was not really the founder of these ideas. Adam Smith was, as I said, a moral philosopher, and he has very good morals, even though he's basing them on secular foundations, but still he has the right ideas about morality. But basically, modern economists do a very selective reading of Adam Smith. He had a few lines somewhere in his, somebody counted that he has written 17,000 sentences, and of these, about 5 or 6 can be used to support the idea of selfishness is good. And these are the 5 or 6 that are cited everywhere. And all of this, thousands of statements which are against this are never cited. But why do they do this? Because they want to connect they want to give intellectual prestige to these false ideas. Another idea at the heart of modern Western economics is based on, again, science. The most fundamental science which is taken by, which impressed the West, was the science of physics, which came up from Newton's study of universal gravitation. And basically, if you believe Newton's universal gravitation, then every particle is subject to a law of motion. So from the time of the creation of the universe, everything was already settled. The laws determine everything which happens. And so there is no free will. It's all deterministic. If you know what happened at the beginning of creation, then from then on, every particle is following a law of motion. And there's nothing it can do. And as long as we live in a material universe, there's no roof and there's no non-material substances, then everything that happens is perfectly predictable. So this also has implications. It means that the economic system can be studied like a mechanical object. There's no changes, and there are laws of motion that it follows. Human beings are also robots. They follow mathematical laws. Nobody can actually make choices. So the Quran teaches us that the person who wants to, let him find a pathway, and that that we have shown him the two highways of good and evil, and we have given him the choice. He can go towards the good pathway, or he can go towards the bad pathway. And without this choice, there is no responsibility. I mean, the punishment is that you get for making the wrong choices only if you're free to make the wrong choice. I know this is a complicated topic, but this is the contrast to determinism. And basically, determinism prevents Western intellectuals from thinking about the possibility that we can make good choices. We can choose to be generous. We can choose to be cooperative. They say human nature is what it is, and it cannot be changed, and it is deterministic. So when economics teaches us that individuals are naturally selfish, and this is the best thing for both the individual and the society, economics teaches us the opposite, that this is true, that human beings have selfish desires built into them. Allah Ta'ala says that Zuyyan lin-nas, that Allah Ta'ala has made bright in the eyes of people the desire for gold and silver and horses. And but Allah Ta'ala says that these are not the things to follow, and that by we can change our actions, and we don't have to we don't have to worship our desires. We can worship God instead, and we can create social transformation and become cooperative and generous and trustworthy and overcome these desires. So Islamic economics would be about changing human nature, whereas conventional economists says that this is human nature and there's nothing we can do to change it. And actually, it's best for society if everybody follows their base instincts. There is a technical concept in economics called Pareto optimality, which simply supports status quo. If people have more money, then you should let them have more money. And if you take money away from the rich, you harm them. And so this harm that you do to them cannot be compensated by any benefit that you bring to others. But Islam teaches us the opposite. It says that if people are needy, then the rich must give their wealth to them so that their needs are overcome, because this is their responsibility. So the idea of scarcity, which is the foundation of statistics, is a red herring. It says that the reason we have economic misery throughout the planet is because we don't have enough. So the whole planet is set. The policymakers in economics all over the earth are trying to achieve higher growth so that they can feed the people. But this is completely wrong idea and wrong policy. Scarcity is not the source of the problem. And another idea that the Western intellectuals had is that they moved from the biblical idea that love of the wealth is root of the all evil to Bernard Shaw, that lack of wealth is the root of all evil. People behave badly because they don't have enough money. If everybody had enough, then people would become kind and happy and nice because they don't want any more. But this is not what happens. Actually, if you fulfill wants, people want even more, and that's what the Quran teaches us. And true wealth is therefore the contentment of the heart. And if we pursue wealth, then we will get more and more discontented. The more wealth we want, the more we desire. If you give a man one value of gold, he will want a second one. So instead of trying to fulfill wants, Keynes said that we have to do a two-step solution. We have to first do a lot of growth so that everybody gets enough. Then there will be a huge change. People will start becoming happy and content and live morally and so on. So this was the wrong solution. And this solution is still being pursued all over the world, that if we have enough wealth, then all the problems will be solved. This is not true. This is not what Islam teaches us. Instead, Mahbubul Haq was trained at Harvard, and he followed these prescriptions in actually implementing them in Pakistan. He said that let's pursue growth, and when we get economic growth, this will solve the problem of poverty. But eventually, after experience, he showed that he realized that when we pursue growth, wealth concentrates in the hand of a very small number of families, and this is not desirable for development. So he said, let's look, instead of pursuing wealth, let's try to achieve reductions in malnutrition, disease, illiteracy, unemployment, inequality. And ultimately, he came to the realization that instead of pursuing growth to reduce poverty, we should reduce poverty. And if we just enable our people to live reasonable lives, to have lives with dignity and with not with starvation, they will actually transform the nation and they will create the growth in GNP that you want. So this is the opposite of what current modern economic theory teaches us. Modern economic theory teaches us to pursue growth, and that is the path to reducing poverty. But what the Quran teaches us and what Mahbub al-Haq learned from experience is that you take care of your people and they will create whatever economic growth is desirable. So this is about the last slide, that the ideas of economists and philosophers, both when they are right and when they are wrong, are more powerful than is commonly understood. See, I am talking about the moral foundations of economics. Does this really matter? Does this are these any abstract and vague ideas important? My contention, which is aligned with this quote, is that these are very, very important. These buried ideas, which are hidden in the foundations of modern economics, these have penetrated the minds of Muslim economists and policymakers all over the Islamic world, and they prevent us from seeing the truth, and they prevent us from recognizing the teachings of Islam, which provide us with the solution to our problems. But we can't see them because our minds have been indoctrinated by Western poisons. So I'm going to now conclude this lecture and say that economics is basically the religion of worship of wealth. And this underlying false philosophy is that the wealth is the solution to all human problems. This philosophy emerged from the European experience of global conquest and colonization, in which the whole of Europe made pursuit of wealth the goal of life for individuals and for the society as a whole. We have to understand that this is a religion which is based on toxic moral foundations. And so when we want to rebuild Islamic economics, we cannot do it in the way that it is currently being done, as a mixture of Western economics and Quran and Sunnah. We have to throw out the whole toxic discipline, and we have to rebuild on new foundations, which are radically different moral foundations. And this is different from Islamization of knowledge. Basically, the Islamization of knowledge project says that we take the body of knowledge and we eliminate the bad things from it, and we incorporate the good things from Islam, and that's how we will get knowledge. And this is the path that is being pursued all over the planet by Islamic thinkers. But this is not the way to go, because the whole body of knowledge is built on poisonous foundation. So we have to just reject it completely and rebuild on new moral foundations. So basically, that is the last set of things that I wanted to say. All right, so I think we will stop here and open the floor for questions.
Jazakallah khair, thank you. Yeah, please unmute for any questions, or raise your hands. Okay, Brother Farid, can you unmute yourself, or go ahead?
Yes, I can. Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh Asad Zaman. Just a quick question for you. You mentioned that in the beginning that the knowledge of the deen, it comes from the wahi, or it comes not from rationality and logic. And what I'm trying to understand is, let's just say that someone, we believe as Muslims that everybody has a fitrah, but now to get someone to just a basic belief of God, would you say that starts from observation? As we see in the Quran many times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to look at the skies, the moons, look at the nature, look at the signs, ayat of Allah, afaki wa anfusi. So what would you suggest? Is there a room for rationality to come to the belief of God, and then the basic block starts building from there? Just wanted to hear your thoughts on that, inshallah. I hope you understand my question.
It's a good question. This is exactly what the Mu'tazila said, that we use our reason to understand the Quran. Therefore, reason is primary, and it takes precedence over Wahi.
And just to clarify, I think the reason to understand the Quran, I think, you know, that piece I kind of understand. It's like Wahi takes precedence always. I'm thinking the reason to understand, come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the exist, as an example.
Yeah, you see, it's very important to understand this because the Western scholars and intellectuals have persuaded us otherwise. The truth is that reason by itself cannot get anywhere. And this is what Imam Al-Ghazali taught us. See, to reason, you have to start with something. And you have to start with something that you believe. And then on the basis of that, suppose you have zero knowledge. How can you use reason? You can't, when you have nothing, you can't get anywhere. So you have to start with some axioms. This is the standard. I mean, how do you use reason? We have the first example, all men are mortal and Socrates is a man. So these are the two axioms. Once you have these two axioms in place, then you can use reason to deduce that Socrates is mortal. But if you have no axioms, nothing whatsoever, then you can't start your reasoning process. So where do we start this reasoning process? This is also what Imam Al-Ghazali tells us. And this is a very beautiful teaching which is not accessible to the West. Basically, in the Misaq Alast, Allah Ta'ala created us all before the start of the creation. And he said, he made us recognize him. He said, Alastu bi rabbikum, and we all recognized him. And Allah Ta'ala says that, so this is because you should not say to me that in the Yawm al-Qiyamah that I did not know this and I was uninformed. Now this is very strange because we don't have any conscious memory of this event. So how can Allah Ta'ala hold us responsible for something we have no memory of? Well, the answer is that we do have memory of this. This experience was imprinted on our hearts. And this is available to children at birth. And so we recognize God with our hearts, and our hearts are the source of knowledge, and our hearts testify to the presence of Allah, and our hearts testify to the fundamental truths. And so our hearts give us the certainty about these fundamental truths. And this is basically what Imam Ghazali said, that it was the illumination from Allah that created certainty. And once you have this certainty, then you can reason your way to deeper truths and become more certain. But you can't start the reasoning process from zero. So that's the basic solution to this problem, which is not accessible to Western intellectuals, but because they reject the heart as a source of knowledge.
Jazakumullah khair.
Any other questions? Your abstract mentioned about Karl Marx, the criticism on capitalism, Dr. Zaman.
Yes.
Where do you put Karl Marx in the current era now? Because the failure of communism and the utilization of Marx's philosophy by the communists was a failure. But his critique
first of all,
capitalism,
we must understand this is something which Islamic economists, the first generation, saw very clearly. Both Karl Marx and capitalists, they have minor differences. And then Karl Marx was also a materialist. And basically, both, the difference between Karl Marx and capitalists is that they believe that both of them believe that increasing material welfare is the goal of life. And the more money we have and the more wealth we have, the more prosperous we are. And this is the only goal. But Marx believed that the capitalist system will not lead to material welfare. It will lead to increasing exploitation of labor, and it will lead to increasing wealth in the hands of the capitalists. and that calls for a revolt. And if the laborers revolt against the capitalists, they will be able to build a more prosperous society. And I think that this basic idea is very correct and is very true. And we can see this in the world over the last 30 years or 40 years or so. Ever since Russia broke down, the capitalists have acquired more and more power, and the wealth is becoming more and more strongly concentrated in the hands of the rich. Right now, 10 years ago, it was about 100 people who owned half the wealth of the planet, and now it's less than 10. So wealth is rapidly becoming concentrated because of the fall of Russia. While communism model was available, capitalism could not show its true colors because they had to compete with alternative models, and they had to appeal to rest of mankind, and the rest of mankind had two models to follow. But once they destroyed Russia by various kind of tactics, then this is the only model, and so now they can open their concealed ambitions and cause damage and destruction. So neither of these are good models, but Marx had some very deep and powerful insights which continue to be valid. The fact that his followers implemented a system which was not good is also something that our first generation Islamic economists foresaw. They saw that what Karl Marx wanted was that from each to his earning ability, to each according to his needs. And such a system was actually created, even though communist countries were not very prosperous in terms of capitalist ideas of producing excess and surplus. They were able to feed everyone in their country. And after the collapse of capitalism, there was massive hunger and starvation in Russia. So anyway, that's not, neither of these are good models as economics. Neither of these are good economic models for us, because we don't believe that the pursuit of wealth is the right goal to follow.
And you said that the Islamic economists took it wrong in their plan. Who are those people that we should avoid?
Okay, well, first generation, I have this detailed discussion. The first generation of Islamic economists, this includes Maududi and many others of his stature who developed ideas and contrasted them with communism and Marxism, and came up with assertions that Islam offers us a superior system. Then the second generation consists of a large number of intellectuals, and I will not name them, but basically people who have been writing since basically the transition from first generation took place in the 70s. And before the 70s, you see the first generation writing. Then after the 70s, most people are writing in second generation mode. And second generation, the distinguishing feature is that the first generation rejects capitalism and communism and says that Islam offers us a better model. And the second generation says that basically Islamic economics is a branch of capitalism. Capitalism is more or less correct. It has a few errors and flaws which we can fix. They use interest-based system, and we can replace that by musharka. And they don't have zakat and concern for the poor, and we can add that in. So basically, by making minor trimmings and modifications to capitalism, we get to Islam. So this is the same process is true of Islamic banking, where we say, okay, we take a Western bank and we trim it in some ways, and we will get to Islamic banks. And again, this is not the correct idea. Yes, Abdul Haq is raising his hand, although visually, not electronically. But go ahead, please unmute and ask a question.
Okay.
Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, now I do. Assalamu alaikum. How do you, one of these economists, the only ones I know, is Najatullah Siddiqui and Muhammad Umar Chapra. How is their thinking aligns with yours?
All right, I have in the latest journal of the Turkish Journal of Islamic Economics, I have an article which discusses the definitions of Islamic economics made by 30 different scholars, and I try to align them with one concept. And basically, my concept of Islamic economics is that Islamic economics is built on the moral foundations of Quran and Hadith. And I show that at least 16 of these scholars, or maybe 20 of them, have similar idea that basically you cannot develop Islamic economics from atheistic foundations and from the moral foundation. And most Islamic economists have made these definitions, but some of the leaders in the field have stepped away from this, and they have said that we will build on the foundations provided by economic theories. You should not reinvent the wheel. This is a very common statement. Since economists have already built the wheel, now we must utilize this, and we can add to this from Islamic insights. So some of these people who are very influential have asked Islamic economists to accept the foundations laid by modern economists, and that has gotten the field stuck in a trap, because we cannot get out of, once you accept, basically modern economics is like fire and Islamic economics is like ice, or vice versa, and you cannot mix the two of them. And basically the field has been stuck in a trap for 40 years because people have been trying to mix. They have been unable to reject. And so if you want the names, you will find his name also in this article. And I have said that in particular, if you want to answer your question, that Najatullah Siddiqui is ambivalent. You can interpret him in the right way, which I have done, or you can interpret him to be with the modernists also. And because of this ambiguity, and because of his leadership status in the field, we have had confusion on this issue. But some of his writings are very clear and very strong that we need to throw away all of modern economics and rebuild on Islamic foundation. But others have an attitude and mode of compromise, so leads people to confusion.
How about Chapra, Muhammad Umar Chapra?
He is also similar situation.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Brother Tasir.
This is Sister Tasir. It's one of my students.
Oh.
Yes, Tasir. Unmute yourself.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Alaikum assalam.
Sir, actually, I wanted to ask this, that it's been more than 3 years that I am continuously working on the courses and teaching those courses and interacting with students. One of the major issues that I am facing while discussing all these ideas is that when I'm taking courses with the students and they are sitting in my course and we are talking about these hidden moral hazards within conventional economics and how to actually recognize them and reject them and move on. The rest of the faculty is teaching courses with a very different set of mind. And within the classroom, there is such a big clash of ideologies coming from 2 different teachers or 3 different teachers. So that is creating a lot of confusion, not within only the classrooms, but within the Board of Studies meetings and Board of Faculty discussions, and even discussions that I'm having as Director QEC with HEC. When we are having content discussions with HEC, we are having this sort of problem. How do you suggest we handle it, or how to proceed without, without creating too many open conflicts, and how to actually proceed about it? This is one issue I wanted to discuss.
Okay, this is a very, very good question, because this is actually what the pragmatic on the ground issue, which I have also personally faced, that because I had when I started this project 20 years ago, trying to replace economic education, I had a lot of power. I was Director General of International Institute of Islamic Studies. And so not only I had power, I was in the right institute, which was the Institute for Islamic Economics. So I could steamroller the opposition, because I said that, look, this is the Institute of Islamic Economics, not Western economics. And I also had stature and prestige. So I was able to do things which other people would not have been able to do. And if I had not had the same power and status, then I would not have been able to. And this would have caused massive amount of confusion. I was actually, before that, I was in LUMS and I was teaching similar courses. And my students, it took me half a semester to persuade people. And they would persuade, and I said, this is a good course for understanding, but is not useful for us in the real world because it conflicts with getting degrees and it conflicts with other courses. So as far as the answer to this question concerns, this is, the answer has to be very, very pragmatic. Now, if you look at the fate of the heterodoxy, people who are saying similar things from other angles in the West. If you look at the Western academia, there are lots of economists who understand the flaws. And they say that, modern economics is just a cover story to protect the interests of the wealthy. And we should try to, they're coming at it from communist angles, from many other different angles. So you can attack modern economics from many, many different angles. But they have been effectively silenced and suppressed, and they're not part of the mainstream economics profession. And heterodoxy has been very, very effectively marginalized. There's just one university in the USA, the New School, where some amount of heterodoxy remains. There were a few others, but they were shut down and closed, and people who were senior heterodox economists have been thrown out of their positions. So the tactical, strategic moves are, there's no general principle that can be given. It depends on who you are, where you are, how much power you have. You have to negotiate your own circumstance and use tactics. There are various places. When my students come to me for PhD thesis, I say that, look, don't, first of all, you must understand you're not going to launch a revolution in this thesis. What you do is you take a mainstream theory and you make a small objection to it somewhere. And even that objection should be aligned with objections which have already been made in the literature and which are accepted. And I can tell you where the areas are, where people have made criticism, like behavioral economics is a good area, agent-based models is a good area, because there is an established body of research which allows you to challenge conventional mainstream economics. But this is a very, this is both very important, and no general principles can be given. It all depends on where you are, how much power you have, and what kind of changes you are able to make. You have to judge the situation and act accordingly. So that's all I can tell you. For the moment, we can discuss more in details, precisely your issues and separately.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone? Yeah. Okay, if there are no other questions, inshallah, we'll be meeting on a monthly basis with Dr. Zaman as his time allows, inshallah, to benefit from his experience and knowledge. So if there are any questions, you can post it on our WhatsApp group or save it for the next monthly session. And inshallah, this recording will be made available along with Dr. Zaman is usually very efficient in sharing his slides. Anything else, Dr. Zaman, before we conclude? Okay, inshallah. I would like to thank everybody who attended the program, and inshallah see you all next month. Jazakallahu khair. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صدق الله العظيم. Thank you, Dr. Zaman. Really appreciate it. Jazakallah khair.